President Zimmer is the 13th president of the University of Chicago. He's really been at the university for over a very distinguished time, starting as really an instructor in the mathematics department, then serving in various roles. And he served as provost of Brown University before returning to the University of Chicago in 2006 to become the president of the university. And he currently also serves as the chair of the board for the Argonne National Laboratory, the Fermi Laboratory, and also for the Marine Biological Laboratory. And of course, he's the recipient of many honors and distinctions over the years. But I do want to emphasize that he's really, as a faculty member, I'm not supposed to say too many things praising the president, but he's a legend. He's truly remarkable in leading the university, especially in times of crisis and change. And of course, he's been steadfast in his support of the university's international initiatives over the last few years in particular. So it's really a great opportunity to be working with him over the years. Now, I also want to say a few words about our distinguished alum. Many of you know and have heard and have read Professor Justin Yifu Lin, Lin Yifu 教授. He's truly a legend, and of course, he joins a long line of alums of the University of Chicago who have made contributions, who have made a difference, not only in theory, but also to the practice of the world. And of course, going back in history, the University of Chicago, for example, trained the founding generation of physicists that are really provides the foundations for industrial development and the sciences, for example, in China. And of course, it's at the start of the reform era in China that Justin went to the University of Chicago, studied in the economics department at the University of Chicago, and then returned to be a policy researcher initially, but then became the founding director of the China Center for Economic Research at Peking University. And then a few years ago, he served as the first Asian to hold the position of chief economist and senior vice president at the World Bank before returning to Peking University, and now continues as professor in the School of National Development as honorary dean as well of that particular school. And of course, has published many books on the Chinese economy and on economics in general. So it's truly a great pleasure to welcome them for President Zimmer to start with some questions and to have a conversation. Then we'll open up with questions from the audience. So for now, please join me in welcoming President Zimmer to make a few remarks, and then he'll start with the question.
Thank you very much, Dolly. So I know that everyone is here for the main event, which is to hear from Professor Lin. Before that, I did just want to say a few words about this center and the University of Chicago thinking about China and our global situation more generally. So this center in Beijing is now 5 years old. It's been, from my point of view, a remarkable success. Over the course of the first 4 years, there were over 10,000 people who participated in programs at this center. These ranged in programs over the full breadth of what the University of Chicago does, whether it was in science and medicine, business, economics and policy, culture, and the arts. And more than that, though, which may not be quite so evident if one just looks at the list of programs here at the center, is the impact that this has had in Chicago on campus. That impact has been what I would say is a much greater sense of both the opportunities and the importance, and one might even say, to some extent, the obligation for the university, its faculty, and its students to be engaged in thinking about China, building connections to China, and thinking about how the remarkable developments in China that have been taking place over the last several decades and will surely continue, how those affect the nature of disciplines of scholarship and, of course, of education. So it's been quite gratifying to see how the set of opportunities that have been created by the center in Beijing for our faculty and for our students have had an impact on this awareness of opportunities and importance of relationships in China. Some of you may know that we are in fact preparing to open a center in Hong Kong as well. That's planning for that is underway. Their programs are in place, but they're in temporary space right now. So that will be, I believe, another exciting connection to China, and we're looking forward to seeing how that develops. The center in Beijing was successful enough that it gave us the confidence to also open a similar but slightly smaller center in Delhi. That's been open now just for about a year. It has been, following what happened here in Beijing, quite successful. And one of the interesting things that we are trying to think about now is with a center in Beijing, one in Delhi, and also one in Paris, and of course we still are in Chicago, how one thinks about these various presences across the world and how does one connect them and not think about them simply as separate things, but actually as a place for increasing all sorts of discourse. So with that introduction as background, let me add my welcome to Justin Yifu Lin, who has been a remarkably distinguished alum of the University of Chicago. We're extremely proud of him. And Justin has done a great deal for the university over many years, and I'm just delighted to have a chance to talk with him here today. So just to sort of warm up, Justin received his PhD in 1986 in economics from the University of Chicago. He worked with Professor Gary Becker, who is surely one of the most influential, not only economists, but social scientists of the second half of the 20th century. And I just ask Professor Lin to just reflect back on his experience at the University of Chicago, his experience working with Gary Becker, and any other thoughts about your time in Chicago that you'd like to talk about.
Before answering your question, let me first start with that I'm extremely proud to be an alum of the University of Chicago, one of the best universities in the world. And certainly today, I'm honored to have the opportunity of having this dialogue with our president, Bob Zimmer. And I saw many young faces here, and I wish you will be as lucky as I was to be admitted to Chicago so you can spend a few years to learn from the masters in every field of academics. Then coming to your questions. I was lucky to be admitted to Chicago in '82, and so I had the opportunity to spend a few years to study from Gary Becker, Ted Schultz, Bob Fogel, and Bob Lucas, and also Jim Hackman, and so on. And I think I was lucky in the sense that we have a saying, to give a fish or to teach how to fish. And I was lucky because I not only got a lot of fishes, I also learned how to fish. And that really helped me in my careers when I returned to China. And that's one thing. And then secondly, I think that what I give, what I learned and what I got from Chicago. I think what I got from Chicago, in addition to how to fish, but also the confidence. After I pass all this requirement from Chicago, I have a confidence that if I can pass all those requirements, then I can achieve things I like to have. And not only my self-confidence, other people also have confidence on me. If I can pass all those requirements in Chicago, then other people will have a confidence that any task they assign to me, I will be able to accomplish.
Okay, thank you. So moving a little bit more in the direction of your own concrete work and thinking about economics, you've been very articulate in your writings, in your speeches about the appropriate roles of state and market and how that varies according to stage of economic development. So I just asked you to sort of reflect on how you developed that perspective, how it evolved over time, just the evolution of your thinking of what's, I think, a very important and distinctive view that you've articulated.
That's a very good question. Because as I said, what I learned from Chicago, not only the fishes, but also how to fish. Certainly, Chicago is known for the emphasizing the importance of market. But when I came back to China in 1987, China is a country on the process of transition from the planned economy to market economy. And China is also a low-income country on the process to move up the ladder to become a middle-income, high-income country. So that means that I need to understand the nature of the process of transition and the nature of the process of development. And in this process, I think certainly the goal for us is to move to the market economy, but we need to have an orderly transition. And that kind of orderly transition means that you need to have someone to really design the process and implement the policies, and you need to have a state there. That's one thing. And then secondly, in terms of the process of development, it's also a process of structural transformation. The country need to continue to improve the technology and move the resources to new industries with higher value added. And this kind of process also need to have improvement in the infrastructure in the institutions. And in this process, certainly you need to allocate resources according to the market so you can have the efficiency. But at the same time, there's many externality and coordination issue there. And those kind of externality, you need to have the government to compensate for that. And the coordination also need to have the government to provide those kind of coordination in terms of improvement of infrastructural institution. So that gives me the opportunity to come up some of the ideas. We need to have the state and the market to work together in order to have a smooth transition and also a more dynamic economic development. And I could have those kind of ideas because I learned how to fish when I was at Chicago.
So when you talk about these ideas in an audience that is, let us say, more focused on economists, when you talk with economists who might be more focused on markets rather than state. What kind of reaction do you get?
Certainly, people at the beginning will be suspicious. But what we learn in Chicago is that you're never afraid to debate with other people. And to win your debate by logics as well as empirical evidence. And those also, what I learned from Chicago.
So if you look at China and the United States as two largest economies in the world, and you think about them at, as you've said, at different stages of development, and maybe therefore requiring different balance between state and market. There are also major long-term embedded cultural differences between the United States and China. And I just kind of ask, how much does the culture of individual countries, I mean, just United States and China as example, but not the only example, how much does that figure in what the right way to think about the nature of the economy is in order to be of maximal benefit for the country? Do cultural considerations figure in this, or are they not so important?
I think culture certainly is important, because culture will have some impact on people's acceptance of certain things, certain behaviors. Because what is legitimacy can be different in different countries. As you know, that Deng Xiaoping, at the last 15 years of his life, he did not have any job except for the honorable chairman of the British Society in China. But everyone accepted him as the most powerful person in China. He could have the final say on almost everything, make a decision, everyone will follow. And in the US, it was impossible to consider that you are going to have some person like Deng Xiaoping in the US, because in the US, the mandate came from the elections. But in China, the mandate came from people's respect to him. And I think those kind of cultural things. But I'm working on economic development. In terms of economic development, certainly you need to be competitive in the market for the good you produce, and with the quality and the cost which will make you competitive. Those kind of fundamental things should be similar as a principle in any country, in any stage of development. But what kind of policy or what kind of institution would be acceptable? That certainly has some kind of cultural contents there. But fundamentally, it's very important for us to know what would be the basic principle for the competitiveness, and then come up with the institution or policy framework which will be embedded in your culture. And so that means that it's somewhat we need to have a good understanding of the cultural difference, and also when we study in Chicago, we know the basic principles. But if we want to apply those kind of basic principles back home, we also need to pay attention to your own history and culture.
How much do you think that that point of view is appreciated? So in the United States, one talks a great deal about the United States and Europe and China, Japan, often in a kind of similar voice, without thinking very much about the fact that these are actually all rather different cultures, and that Therefore, the context in which the economies are evolving and taking place actually have to be rather different. Do you think that this is appreciated? I mean, your comments are appreciated widely or not so widely?
I think increasingly, those kind of concept has been appreciated. Otherwise, the University of Chicago will not set a center in China, right? So you come here, and also you have a better observation of the societies. You have a better interaction with people here, and that will enhance our understanding about what is and appreciate, what is valued, and what can really work in a country with different cultural contexts.
Yeah, I will say that I think one of the most important things about the center in Beijing, and in fact work globally, is exactly this point that one actually can understand that there are in fact different cultures, are different sets of assumptions, are different things that can be accepted and admitted. And I think it's a very important thing for students to understand. So just switching gears slightly, even though I'll circle back in a moment. So you were chief economist of the World Bank for 4 years, and just might ask you to reflect on what worked well, what didn't work well for the World Bank. This is, of course, particularly relevant at this moment, perhaps, as we now have a new Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank being planned and soon to be put in place. And as you reflect on the World Bank and what its strengths and challenges were, what lessons, if any, are relevant for this new bank that's being put in place?
Very good questions. I think that World Bank, as the prime global development institutions, and also with thousands of very committed, well-educated staff, and it makes a contribution to bring the understanding of what are the desirable and what are the best practice in other parts of the world. And also, encourage people to pay attention to some area which people locally may neglect. I think the World Bank is very good in that areas, and also providing some funding to support some of the needs in the developing country. But so far, the World Bank, and also to some extent, not only the World Bank, the global development institution have not been able to really help the country to have a very dynamic economic growth, or how to jumpstart those kind of process into a sustainable way. So if you look into the motto of the World Bank, the vision is a world free of poverty. Very desirable. But if we took the reduction of 680 million people from poverty came from China, the total number of people living in poverty has not been reduced. So that means it's a dream has not accomplished yet. And and that is because the global development communities has not been able to really help a country trapped in poverty and to start their new path of dynamic economic growth. And I hope that and the new institution, the new development bank, sponsored by the BRICS, and also the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, may make a little bit contribution that can do some kind of project we can turn into the starting point of dynamic economic growth in the developing world.
So speaking of the developing world, I was just in Egypt a week or so ago, where there was a major economic development conference with many people from all over the world there who were interested in thinking about investing in Egypt, with the sense that this was potentially a time when one could see a renewed economic development in Egypt. Now, Egypt has a lot of features that we've just been speaking about. It has a particular stage of economic development. It has a particular culture, strong cultural history, distinct from both China and the United States. I think that people realize that a key feature of economic development in Egypt, if it would take place, would be a type of outside investment from outside of Egypt. So when you sort of put all these things together and you think about Egypt as a potential place of economic development, what do you see as the actual opportunities, and what are the major challenges that they're going to face?
Well, I think Egypt, is comparable to China in the early 1980s. It's a country at, still low income level, abundant supply of young labor force. And so, if they can develop some kind of industries which are consistent with their competitive advantage, that means labor-intensive manufacturing. Those kind of industry can really provide job to the young people and also turn their labor force into their competitiveness. And I think that is the basic principles. And also, certainly for the government, they need to have some kind of quick wins to show this kind of model works, and then they can multiply those kind of success into other part of the countries. But here is that how to have those kind of quick wins. That is some kind of pragmatism would be desirable. Certainly, if you want to turn your labor abundant supply of labor as your competitiveness, not only you need to develop the labor-intensive manufacturing, you also need to improve the infrastructure, and also need to have good institution, good governance. But we know that if you want to improve the infrastructure for the whole nation, or improve the governance for the whole nation, then it may take decades, and it's still unable to do that. So under that kind of situation, it might be a much better approach just to create some kind of pockets or some kind of localized areas with good infrastructure and with efficient institution within those kind of pocket of areas. So something like a special economic zone or export processing zone, and use the resources that under the command of the government or under the command of the president, and quickly to build all those kind of area to show it works, and to gain the confidence of the people on the administration. And with that, they may be able to, to have a dynamic success and turn that into a dynamic growth path, just like we observed in China in the past 30 years.
So speaking of regions, one of the striking phenomenon that one is seeing now is this massive rate of urbanization of the world's population, from 3% in 1800 to 13% in 1900 to now over 50%. And one of the things that's sort of most striking that I like reminding people in the United States is that in the last 25 years, the number of people who have moved from rural to
Yeah.
urban areas in China is essentially equal to the entire population of the United States. So when you think about this huge shift in urbanization, how does that affect the way one thinks about economic development and economic growth?
Well, certainly, if you have a large migration to the cities and you want to maintain social stability, you need to have jobs for those young people. And that's the reason why I think that to rely on their competitive advantages in their very intensive manufacturing, because those are the areas which can really provide a job and also turn their labor force into their competitiveness. And with that, you can have economic growth. The government will have more revenue, more resources. They can improve the infrastructure, and so you can have this kind of virtual cycles for the development. But if you do not have a job for the young people, then you are going to have ghettos, poverties, and social instabilities. So depends on the right ideas for the development, then the large migration to the cities can be, a competitive age. But at the same time, if you do not have the right ideas about development, even you have good intentions, you can cause more trouble for the society as well.
So you've lived in the United States as a student. You lived in the United States as chief economist of the World Bank. So you have a understanding, I think, not only of China and the view of the world from China, but of the United States and the view of the world from the United States. And as we go forward, one of the things, of course, in Chicago, everybody believes competition is a good thing, makes us all better. And so the fact that there's inevitably going to be competition between the United States and China can be a good and healthy thing. So what one wants to see is a healthy, collaborative competition rather than, shall we say, an unhealthy confrontational competition. So if you look at the United States from the point of view of China, what is it that China actually both needs and can reasonably expect from the United States? And from the point of view of the United States looking at China, what is it that the United States needs and can reasonably expect from China in both cases in order to lead to a healthy collaborative competition rather than another type?
I think that to understand each other's and to have a good understanding of each other's will be the foundation of the cooperation. Certainly, when China rise and U.S. gradually, will, reducing its dominance, and then in this kind of process, some kind of tension may be there, some kind of suspicion will be there. But I do see basically the rise of China is beneficial not only for China, but also for the US. And especially at this stage, the economic-wise, China is complementary to the US. US is a high-income country, and if you look into the area which US is good at, both in the manufacturing or in the services and in the education, those are the weaknesses of China. So China will benefit a lot from the collaboration with the US. But at the same time, what China can provide are those areas in terms both in the manufacturing sectors, basically in the more traditional, more labor intensive, and those kind of product US has graduated from. US will not produce. And if China, can provide those kind of export to the US, and that can allow the U.S. to have supply of good quality but low cost of goods. And so that's good for the consumer in the U.S. But at the same time, if China maintaining this dynamic economic growth, then China will provide a market for the U.S., its export, its service, and so on. So I think this economic-wise, it's complementary to each other. It's a win-win to each others. But even someday, China will become middle income now and will become high income. And in Chicago, we also know, we also learned that the trade can base on that competitive advantages independent state of development, as I just described. But the collaboration, the win-win situation can also come from the specialization. When China reaches the same stage of development as the US, just like Europe now at the same stage as the US, but the economic relation is still win-wins because each country will specialize on certain sectors. And as long as the other economy is expanding, then it will provide a market and a growth for the sectors that you specialize. So if we learn the wisdom from Chicago, any economic transactions based on market is a win-win for both sides. And I hope that this kind of message can be bear in mind both in China and also in the US. Then we are going to have a more peaceful and dynamic economic development for the whole world.
So just, we've been talking about the economy, and let me sort of circle back to where I started. So I started just asking you about Chicago, but let me ask you about Chinese universities, because you're not only an extremely distinguished economist with a big impact on the world, but you're a faculty member and professor. So when you look at Chinese universities, like everything else in China, it's full of ambition and high aspiration. And I just ask you to kind of reflect on what those aspirations are for universities, particularly the leading universities such as Beida in China, and also what the challenges are in realizing these aspirations.
Well, I see the main challenges for the universities in China. On the one hand, how to provide the education and the knowledge to prepare the students to make a contribution to the development in China. And the knowledge which will be preparing for making those kind of contributions. That's on the one hand. And secondly, as universities, we also need to make a contribution to the development of ideas of knowledge in the world. So I think those are the two types of challenges. One is to how to help the students. The other one is the faculty members or some of the students in the future will have the ability to make a contribution to the expansion of our understanding of the world.
Okay, thank you. What I'd like to do now is just move to some questions and hopefully some answers. And I think Professor Dali Yang is going to orchestrate this section.
Yeah, I'll simply point to the those who hold their hands up. So for the sake of time, but especially to make sure that more people have a chance to ask questions. So please identify yourself, but also limit to one question per person. Okay. Yeah. Or Richard. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Richard Xie from the Paulson Institute. Yeah, my question to Dr. Lin, that is in terms of the the campaign of One Belt, One Road from President Xi Jinping delivered. So very interesting about your point of the view for this campaign is how to impact the China economy in coming years. Is over aggressive or sustainable? Can you share some personal point about this campaign?
Well, I think it's an initiative that is a win-win for the recipient country and also for China and also for the rest of the world. Because if you look into what is the major bottleneck, the development in most developing countries, infrastructure. If you go to India, go to Latin America, go to Africa, you see the infrastructure bottlenecks almost everywhere. And there's a huge shortage of funding for the infrastructure investment in the developing country. And the One Belt, One Road initiative try to, provide a basis for making more infrastructure investment in the developing world. And certainly that's good for the recipient country. It's good for China also, because China at this stage has competitive advantages in the construction material and also in the implementation of construction. And so that is also good for China. And also I think it's good for the world because high-income country today, like in the US or in Europe or in Japan, to have an expanding markets in the developing world will help them also, both job and opportunity for the reform in their domestic economy, structural reform, and so on. And so I see this kind of initiative is a win-win initiative. And and it's an opportunity for China to do that. And as I said, infrastructure is the bottleneck. But like in Asia alone, the needs for the infrastructure is $8 trillion in the coming 10 years. But the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank can maybe provide only 5% of the needs. And so the more is better.
Thank you for this wonderful dialogue. My name is Paul Wang, and both President Zimmer and Dr. Lin has mentioned about Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. My question are first to both, or to Dr. Lin. Will this bank, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, become a competitor to World Bank? And also, the second question is, will this bank actually improve the relationship between China and its neighboring countries, this bank, because it's going to invest a huge amount of money in Asia? And lastly, do you anticipate that U.S. would run this Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank? Thank you.
That's a question for you.
Yeah, well, I think that whether it's going to be a competition or cooperation, I do see more from the angle of cooperation. As I said, the needs is so huge. And the World Bank can only provide a small part of the needs. And so under this kind of situation, the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank can provide more to that. And even we combine the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank with the World Bank with Asian Development Bank, can still not meet the need. Because space is so huge, so there's no need for competition. It's better to cooperate and to make things move in a much more efficient way. And I think that, as I said, development is a primary concern in every country. And so if this initiative can help other countries to remove part of their bottleneck, and also enabling them to have a more dynamic job creation and also development, I think that should be will be welcomed. And that's the reason why you see, now many other countries also join the initiatives.
I did note earlier today the wires are reporting that the Obama administration has recommended that the World Bank should seek to collaborate with IIB in the future. I do want to follow up with World Bank related question, because theoretically the World Bank resides in the country of the largest shareholder. Do you anticipate at some point it will become if China has become nominally the largest economy in the world, that it could actually also become the largest shareholder, and therefore, in fact, the headquarters of the World Bank could move to China, and therefore there wouldn't be actually a...
Well, with the increasing size of China need to make a more contribution to this kind of global public goods. So I think that China will become the larger shareholders in the development institution. China wanted to be a larger shareholder of the World Bank, of IMF, and although there's some limitation not from the China side, but from the US politics side. That's one thing. And secondly, China will be a large shareholder. But whether China should have this kind of dominating role, especially those kind of veto power on things based on some kind of institutional arrangement or not, I think maybe those are the areas that China can learn a lesson. Because you know that in the World Bank or in IMF, we have UN here. The rule is that you need to have 85% vote in order to move on a major decision. But US has 17% of the voting power. So US one country can veto anything that US does not like. But whether that is a good institution or not is debatable, right?
I actually have a related question connected to something that you said earlier when you were talking about the World Bank and governance issues in countries that are being aided. And we've talked about this a number of years ago, the difficulty of moving money into a country that does not necessarily have the governance structure to be able to utilize it effectively. And if you look at that particular problem, is there some better methodology that the new Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank could use, or is that still just going to be a question?
Well, certainly, this kind of infrastructure investment is used for infrastructure. And so it's easier to monitor, one thing. But the argument in the past was something called debt sustainability, based on the IMF criterion. If the country already has certain amount of debt as a percentage of their GDP, and they should not go beyond that. For that, there may be some area for improvement regarding those kind of criterion, because currently there's no distinction between consumption supporting type of project or investment type of project. And because if you use the grant or the fund for supporting consumption, Social Security or some other things, then you may not be able to generate it, income stream to pay back that. And so certain kind of criterion will be desirable. But even you have a high debt, but you borrow to make investment, that investment will generate income stream to pay back those kind of projects. Then even if you exceed the current level, those kind of lending may still be desirable. And especially, as I mentioned, for many developing countries, it's very important to find a mechanism to help them to jumpstart the dynamic economic growth. And it's some kind of project, for example, they have a lot of young people coming to the cities, and they need to create jobs. But if they use those kind of project fund to support, let's say, industrial park and road link to the port, and to improve the port, then those kind of investment will be desirable, even they already have a high debt in the country. If you make sure they use those funds to make investment in those kind of infrastructure and to turn their resources into a production which can immediately link to the global value chain.
The gentleman over there in the back, yeah.
Thanks. Also on the subject of AIIB, China's new infrastructure bank, the United States has quite vigorously opposed this bank and has, for instance, urged its European allies not to join it, and they recently did. Why do you think the United States is so opposed to the AIIB? And do you think it's a mistake for the United States or the Obama administration to have opposed it so vehemently?
Well, certainly, I think Dali can answer this question better than I do as a political scientist. But as Dali just mentioned, now the administration in the US already changed its position a little bit to encourage the World Bank to work together with the AIIB, so it's a good sign.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Simon Gunn. I'm from the affiliated high school of PKU. And I have one question for Mr. Zimmer and one question for Mr. Lin. So for Mr. Zimmer, I want to ask, during the age of educational revolution recently, do you think the mode of MOOC would be commonly accepted by people, and what do you think the University of Chicago would do with that? And for Mr. Lin, do you think the old way that China did just after the revolution would benefit other countries in poverty, like African countries? So what I mean is, do you think a communism way of distribution of wealth and construction of infrastructure would benefit those countries in poverty? Yeah, thank you.
To start thinking about MOOCs and higher education, the first thing you have to recognize is that higher education is not homogeneous. There's all sorts of different higher education and different institutions offering education with different types of qualities. I think large-scale online education will have a place inside the fabric of the type of educational options that are available within the United States and certainly around the world. I think the particular education at the University of Chicago and also some other leading institutions, which is particularly focused on what I would say is kind of the very personal argumentation, discourse, engagement, and so on. I think it's unlikely that you're going to see a massive use of that inside the curriculum, but that doesn't mean there aren't some uses, and it doesn't necessarily have to be MOOCs, but some other vehicles for using digital technology in terms of education. So I think what you're going to see in a place like Chicago and other institutions like ours is a set of experiments that people are going to do with the nature of the way that digital technologies can enhance the education. I don't think it's going to profoundly change the nature of the goals of the education or the tone of it or the quality of it. There may be other types of institutions where that type of program that you can get from a MOOC is more directly comparable to the type of education that they're offering right now. And that may enable them to use those types of vehicles more extensively and also enable them to do some other things. So you're going to see a wide variety of uses of technology, just as you see a wide variety of institutions right now.
Well, I think that with the modern education and approach and technologies, then the experiences in the world will be, have a better opportunity to spread to other parts of the world, and certainly that will enhance the people's understanding in the other parts of the world to find out what may work in their own country. So, like the approach in China with the new education opportunities, then people will have a better understanding how come China can turn from a country with such a poverty 30 years ago. And even at the time, China was poorer than African country. And how come China could become, such a success story? And what is the lesson behind? And they can appreciate those kind of lessons and apply some of the insight into their own country. So I think it's a good thing. And as long as we can have a better understanding of each other's, not only between the developing country and the developed country, but also among the developing country will be good for the people in the developing countries.
Over here.
Hello, Dr. Lin. I worked for CAT Fund, China Africa Development Fund, which is financed by China Development Bank and focus on equity investment in African countries. You mentioned that the policy of one road, one belt should add one continent, which is Africa. So from our 8 years experience, on the one hand, investment in Africa has huge potentials, but on the other hand, there are high risks. The government is unstable, the money reserve is insufficient, and the labor force is uneducated and unhealthy. So what do you think from your experience in World Bank? What should we do to reduce this investment risk, especially considering that China has not that strong political influence and military influence? Thank you.
Well, I think that we might be starting with something is handleable, something manageable, something which you can have a quick wins. And once you have some quick wins, then other people will be much easier to accept or to follow what, to adapt to themselves to the opportunities. And African countries, as you know, they have 54 countries, and not every country, some country certainly they are in chaos, but you do have some country they have social stability, political stabilities, and they also have the willingness to improve their own situation. So why not start with those few countries which you can help them to, see the result quickly. And once in one or two sectors or in one or two locations, you make them to have a quick success, then they can provide those they can scale up those kind of success in their country. And if you have one or two countries can, be successful, then other country can also start to learn from their experiences and translate that kind of lesson into their own nations. That might be the way to really to make things happen.
From Xinhua News Agency, I have a question for President Zimmer. I heard that the University of Chicago is launching a very ambitious plan called Urban Labs. So can you share some of your vision from your point? Thank you.
Yes, so the urban labs are a set of 5 interlocking laboratories whose goal is to evaluate in a way that is directly applicable to policymakers and policy implementers a set of specific policies. These areas that we're working on are poverty, education, crime, health, and the energy and the environment. Each one of these is led by a distinguished faculty member at the University of Chicago. most of them in one form or another economists, of course. And the goal is to actually evaluate in controlled experiments specific policy proposals which can in fact be implemented. There were some examples of this already done because we didn't start from scratch. There were examples in what was work done by the crime lab around a very specific program that took young men and trained them much more in the question of being able to read people's signals, not make mistakes, not respond with a violent act when violence against them was not intended, and so on. And the question was, is that an effective program or is it not? And can you test whether it is? So that was tested by actual controlled experiments. It was implemented after that by Mayor Emanuel in the city of Chicago, had a significant impact on crime reduction there, and then was implemented in a modified form by President Obama. So that's an example of what happened in the crime lab. The success of that enabled us to have the confidence to establish this suite of labs. They'll all be woven together because a lot of these problems are not totally independent. So that's our goal, to create an effective vehicle for actual rigorous controlled experiment testing of policies that will either be implemented or not, depending upon the efficacy.
I think we have time for a couple more questions. Yeah.
I guess I can speak loudly, okay? I have a question for Dr. Lin. There's one economic situation we cannot ignore because the stock market as fast as a mild car, you know. Do you think in China stock market is right now is overvalued or undervalued in general? Because the reason I ask you, because we notice that for the growth stocks, high technical stocks, their PE ratio could be 200, but for the blue chips, they are maybe even lower than they're supposed to be. In general, market is reasonable or just too high or too low? And that's question one. Question two.
Yeah, I think you are limited to one question.
Okay.
That if I knows, I'll be richer than Bill Gates.
Thank you very much, President Zimmer and Dr. Lin, for the insightful dialogue. I'm Walter Hu of MBA 08. Well, actually, my question is about the Internet Plus, which is a buzzword recently. We heard it many times from the government report from Premier Li Keqiang. Actually, I started up my own internet company, and I'm very eager to know, what is the Chinese government's attitude toward the areas that has not been regulated yet? Because when you innovate, you can't avoid stepping into some gray areas. So when the government encourage the innovations, so what should we do? As an entrepreneur. Thank you very much.
Entrepreneur always find the new opportunities. And if the new opportunity can be educated, I think then we only need ordinary people. We don't need to have entrepreneur. So I think you will answer the question better than I do. If I can provide the answers, then you are going to have too many people in the areas, and there will be not profitable opportunity for ambitious people like yourself.
Okay. Yeah.
Welcome to Beijing. My name is Buddy Sam. I'm a friend of Paul. Just one question for each. Dr. Zimmerman, the question about the college admission process. The other question to Dr. Lin is about AIIB. So the question to admission process. I know this is a recorded conversation. So there's always a myth that the Asian boy and the Caucasian boy usually the myth is on the tougher side of getting to a good college. I don't know whether you want to shed some light. The other question for Dr. Lin is AIIB. Now, like this gentleman mentioned, that Obama administration question about the intent of AIIB, to me, it's justifiably has some kind of question. It's mainly is about transparency or good decision making. So the question to Dr. Lin is, what would AIIB would be to do the right thing, so that to promote all the good things and minimize all the negatives? Thank you.
Well, I can just start, and maybe I'll answer a somewhat more general question rather than the very specific question that you asked, which is the nature of diversity inside the college admissions process, and hence inside the college student population. It's been a very clear effort that the University of Chicago has undertaken to increase the diversity of our student body in many ways. This means many more students who are in significant need of financial aid. We've just started new programs for increasing the number of international students, and we've started new programs for increasing the number of international students who need financial aid, so that the nature of the international student body itself becomes more diverse. We've increased the number of African Americans. We've increased the number of Latino students. And if you actually look at what might be called the sort of the classic image of what an American university used to look like 50 or 60 years ago, our student population as a whole is extraordinarily more diverse along virtually every parameter. I think this is important for the nature of the experience of everyone in the college, and I think it's important for the impact that the alumni body as a whole can have, not just in the United States, but around the world.
Well, AIIB is a new initiative, and China, as well as other founding members, certainly have the incentive to make this initiative a success. And so certainly they will have the incentive to adopt the practice that can ensure the success of this new initiative. And so if those kind of transparency and so on are essential for the success of this initiative, I'm sure the governing members, the governing board of this new bank, they will adopt those kind of practice. And if U.S. think that those kind of principle is so important, and I think the best way to influence the practice of this bank is to join the banks.
My question is for Dr. Lin. So in the experience of China's dynamic economic growth over the last 30 years, we saw a lot of negative externalities, most prominently, I think, the environment. So as China looks to export its model of growth or to encourage infrastructure-based growth in other countries through the AIIB, what is the intention to try and learn from the experience of China in avoiding some of the environmental externalities that have occurred here?
We need to come to some kind of causality issues. Yes, China enjoy a dynamic economic growth in the past 30 years, and we observe the environmental stress. And but if China lower the growth rate, can the environmental issue be improved or not? That might be questionable. And I can give you some examples. In 1979, the per capita GDP in China was lower than the per capita GDP in India. And now the per capita GDP in India was less than 1/4 of the per capita GDP in China. But the environmental issue in India, to some extent, is even more serious than the environmental issue in China. So from this, you can see, the environmental issue is not necessarily related to the dynamic economic growth in China. And personally, I think there are three reasons that how come we see the pollution and so on, smog and so on in China. One, it related to the stage of development. Because China is a middle-income country, China, as well as India, are at the stage of industrialization. And we know that manufacturing compared to agricultural or services has a higher energy intensity as well as emission intensity. Certainly that contribute to their environmental stress. And we observe any other country at similar stage of development, they have similar issue. Britain, Germany, France, and the US also. So it's universal. It's not related to China. As long as you need to go through that stage, you will have similar problem. Secondly, China and India, its energy, their energy relies heavily on coal and makes the situation even worse. And the third one related to the environmental regulation. Certainly, the government, especially at the local level, sometimes they don't have a high incentive to implement the environmental regulation and makes the situation even worse. So with this understanding, maybe we can learn a lesson from China in the sense that if China implement a more, forcibly about the environmental regulation, the situation will be improved to some extent, but the situation will be there, cannot be eliminated. So if we apply this kind of understanding to other countries, we need to understand, if you want to move from the poverty, and we know to move from the poverty, manufacturing stage is a stage you cannot escape. And so you need to prepare that some tolerance to environmental issue. But at the same time, if you have a better regulation, then this kind of issue will not be as serious as China having now. But if you want to really, to avoid this kind of issue, you need to make your development faster. So you can move from the manufacturing stage to the service-based stage. That is high income stage. So high growth may be better than slow growth in a sense.
My name is Rebecca, current EMBA student. My question to Dr. Lin is that to your earlier point, US and China has been working together for many years. And back to the past 2 or 3 decades, at the industry and company levels, US and China company has been working together in joint ventures and product transfer or technology transfer, etc. But moving to the next 1 or 2 decades, when we faced with the China new economics, new normals, how do you see the new features and new model for the two for the industries of the firms of the two countries should work together in the near future? Thank you very much.
Question. New normal is one of the terms used almost every day in every area in China. And my understanding that new normal means the growth rate in China will be a little bit lower than the growth rate in the past 30 years. Because in the past 5 years, the average annual growth rate in China was 9.7%, close to 10%. Most likely, I think the growth rate in China may be reduced down to about 7%. But 7% in China is still, lower than in the past, but still one of the most dynamic growing country in the world. And especially if you consider currently China's GDP, China's GDP is about 13% of global GDP. And a 7% growth rate means that China will contribute to close to about 1 percentage point of growth in the world. And we know that in the world, the growth rate every year is around 3% to 4%. So that means that in the coming decades, China will still contribute to close to about 1/4 to 1/3 of the global growth. So the market in China is still the best market for the global companies. But China certainly will move up the industrial ladders. So in some areas that you need to face the competition. But at the same time, when China move up the ladders, China will import more of the high technology intensive product and so on. And that still at the strength that in that area, high income country like US still have some competitive advantages. So I would say China is still the best market for companies, multinational companies in high-income country.
Hi, my name is Angela, and I'm a current third year at the University of Chicago and on exchange at Beijing 大学. And like we talked a lot about global collaborations, like between the U.S. and China. And after spending a lot of time on each campus, I see there's a large divide between the international students and the local students of each country. So I'm wondering how exactly we can foster the mutual understanding that Lin 教授 said. Thank you.
Well, I think this is something that's been a phenomenon for quite a while. I think it demands constant attention by, in fact, both students who on both sides of this, who actually need to make concrete effort because they see that it's important and people need to get out of a situation of being comfortable. And it demands the university try to foster an environment that actually encourages people to be, frankly, a little less comfortable. And I will say that you have a lot of situations in which people go to a university. There's a lot of ideas around. There's a lot of different people. It's very complex, robust, challenging environment, and it's sometimes hard for people to say, "Okay, I'm going to take a step and push myself and make it yet more challenging by moving into situations where I'm not that comfortable." I think making people aware of the fact that this is important and something they need to be doing, making that kind of discomfort, just recognizing it and making it acceptable for people to have, and that everybody should work together and try to go through it is I think important to do.
I think that doing what you are doing already is a big improvement in the mutual understanding, because for people in the U.S., they can try to understand China from reading of the books or newspapers. But I think that it will be different. If you come to China, and even your interaction with the local people is limited, but already it's a big step towards understanding. And based on that, if you can follow the advice from President Zimmer to make an effort to have more interaction with local people, certainly that will be a plus. But even with what you have now, I think you already understand China much better than those people who never come to China.